Welcome everybody to our first episode of the year of Flight into Enemy Territory. I'm Luke from Play Like a Jet, and we're joined by a very special guest. We have John Ellis coming in. He's the host of The Roar, as well as iHeartRadio's Clemson coverage. You can see him everything Carolina Panthers. John is the go-to guy. So, John, how are you going? You must be excited heading into week one.
Hey, Luke, from many miles away. How you doing, buddy? Looking forward to breaking it down with you. I'm excited, man. It's going to be a fun matchup.
It is for sure. When the schedule first came out, I know I was excited, and it was kind of predictable seeing Sam Darnold, obviously being a former Jets quarterback, coming up against Zach Wilson, the number 2 overall pick in the draft. John, before I touch on Sam specifically, what were your overall thoughts on how the Carolina Panthers handled the quarterback decision in the offseason? Because there was a lot of speculation that David Tepper wanted to make a big move. They were rumored in on the Matthew Stafford deal. Obviously, there was some Deshaun Watson whispers. And then after you traded a second and a fourth for Sam Darnold, then you had Justin Fields and Mac Jones fall in your lap if you wanted them. How did you think the Carolina Panthers attacked the position?
Well, I can tell you they have a lot of conviction about Sam Darnold. I mean, this is somebody that obviously you've seen as a Jets insider there. He's had his struggles at times. He's speaking to the media right now as we record this and has very nice things to say about his time with the Jets. Has been very complimentary, has not slandered the Jets in any way. He said, very clearly today, I didn't play well enough at times. So I think the Panthers do have a lot of faith in this acquisition. But, I mean, there's no doubt there was some interest in Deshaun Watson at one point. I think the Jets were mentioned in that conversation before the draft. Obviously, they were reportedly in on the Matt Stafford opportunity there. There was a lot of rumblings that Stafford was very close to possibly landing here, and it ultimately did not happen. But they were eyeballing Sam, obviously, throughout the offseason. They came up with a trade proposal that they felt was right and fair to them. It's a bit of a gamble. I mean, let's face it, they picked up the fifth-year option. Sam's tape has not been great, as you know, and he's been the first to admit that. But I think getting back to a situation where he has Robbie Anderson to throw to again, I'm sure we'll talk about those matchups, DJ Moore, a healthy Christian McCaffrey. He's now got an opportunity in a smaller market to reset his career and start over. And I think he's excited about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's the weapons he had in New York and the line he had, it didn't give him an opportunity. Look, Sam Darnold definitely had his shortcomings mechanically and also sometimes seeing coverage underneath, but he has an opportunity to be successful. And I know Jets fans are hoping that's the case, maybe just not in week one. So one of the issues he did have, John, was on the offensive line. And looking from the outside, looking in at the Carolina Panthers, I think the left side of the line to me is concerning. Cam Irvine, and then you have the Jets' old friend, Pat Elflein as well. So they're two kind of replacement level, slightly above players. Then on the other side, Taylor Moton is a pro bowler. He's a fantastic player, but you've obviously lost your right guard to the COVID protocols. From my perspective with the Jets, this is our only chance to win the game, is that our defensive line, even without Carl Lawson, if it can be disruptive, then we have an opportunity to win the game and save our very young secondary. How concerned are you about the offensive line heading into week one?
I think you hit the nail on the head there, my friend. It's the one area that I think Carolina may have a little bit of issue with. Now, there's a caveat there. The Jets themselves are very young defensively. They don't exactly have the fearsome foursome up front, but I am concerned about one guy, Quentin Williams. I think he can present some problems. You mentioned the interior part of that offensive line. Oh, man, I'm telling you, Elflein, Matt Paradis, the center, who's a veteran, who's been steady, but without Pro Bowl guys beside him, is not really the guy you want anchoring an offensive line. And then you mentioned John Miller, who's out with the COVID protocol. They now have Dennis Staley stepping in, who's a veteran. He's, kind of a swing tackle journeyman in terms of where he plays along the line. And then Taylor Moton on the right side, I don't have any concerns there. But when you do lose a starter in John Miller, they become a little weaker in terms of pass protection, in terms of their ability to run the wide zone. I do have concerns there. I do think if they can protect Darnold, and that's a big if. You mentioned Cam Irving, left tackle. He's been around a little bit. He's played with the Chiefs. He played with Dallas. He's put some tape together that's some of it's decent, some of it's concerning. If they can hold up for, 3 or 4 seconds at a time and give Sam a chance to take those shots he wants to take. Obviously, he's a little more aggressive than Bridgewater is in terms of the deep ball. He's going to take his shots. He's going to gamble a little more. The one thing that we've talked about in the offseason, I keep mentioning this guy's name, but Greg Cosell from NFL Matchup, we had him on our podcast, and Greg's seen a lot of tape evaluation on Sam, and the best evaluation I've heard is his alignment with his feet and his eyes. Sam has had trouble, and you know this as well, watching Sam over the years, just setting in the pocket and getting comfortable. And part of that's protection. There were issues, but even with clean pockets, there were times where Sam was a little rattled. They've spent a lot of time this offseason working on that with Arnold's mechanics. But again, if you can't protect, the Jets can equalize this game, and that's going to be critical for Carolina to give Sam time and comfort to find those deeper routes.
Something that's going to give Sam a lot of comfort are the wide receivers that the Panthers have. You guys have a plethora of talent, particularly with your top three, and then you throw Christian McCaffrey in there, who's coming back and fully healthy coming into this season. It is polar opposite of what he had here in his time in New York. So the Jets secondary is young. They have no one better than a fifth-round pick starting. They have no one better than a second-year player in that secondary as a corner anyway. You must be so excited and really licking your chops about the prospect of Sam Darnold and those receivers, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson. You've got your rookie, Terrence Marshall Jr., who looked really good through camp repeatedly. He's going to be that big slot type. It must be really exciting for Panthers fans.
Yeah, I think the fan base is excited about it. You know, if you look at where Carolina has been, they haven't had a chance to really marry, you know, weapons with a quarterback. And I think they finally feel, at least the team does, they feel like they finally got a quarterback who can utilize these weapons to the best of their ability. With Bridgewater, he worked hard. He's a good dude. I mean, obviously there were limitations with his game. He was a former Jet. You saw him a little bit. And there's limitations what he can do in terms of pushing the ball downfield. I think Sam gives you a little more durability too. Obviously, he's had some issues with mono in the past, but I think he's structurally just a little more well-built than Teddy. But in terms of the receivers, you're right. A healthy McCaffrey gives them so many options. I mean, who do you cover at this point? When you look at the Jets secondary, they just released Bless Austin. They've got Lamar Jackson. They have some guys at corner that do concern me if I'm a Jets fan when you match up one-on-one against a Robbie, against a DJ Moore. And then you've got a guy like Dan Arnold at tight end, who's a move tight end, can be sort of your Jimmy Graham type that Sean Payton used. The Joe Brady, Sean Payton influence is there. I think you'll see a lot of that movement in Dan Arnold's game. But Terrace Marshall's the guy I'd look for. He's the rookie from LSU. We've loved watching him at camp. I was there every day in Spartanburg. He looks fantastic, Luke. And I think what he showed in the preseason games was even more impressive. Some of the separation skills. He can play all over the play. He can play the boundary X. He can play in the slot. A lot of motion. I think Marshall's the guy primed to have the biggest game. I don't know what type of coverages Salah will play. I think he's a good young head coach that will scheme some things up and try to help that secondary out. But will they try to bring pressure and play cover one? Will they sit back and play some quarters? It's hard to know what kind of coverages you'll see. Probably a mixture of, but I do think, again, it's all about protection. The weapons are only as good as the protection holds up. And if they can't protect, they'll be playing small ball all day. I think that's what Robert Saleh would like to see. If they can limit some of the downfield routes with these receivers, that's a win for the Jets. And it all starts with protection and getting pressure if you're the Jets. But yeah, man, if you look at the receivers on paper, even some of the matchups throughout this, not just the Jets, but the Texans, the Cowboys, some of the teams coming up that maybe have a little more advantage in the secondary than the Jets do, I still think Carolina is going to be, in more games than not, in a good position matching up with their opponent from a receiver versus corner perspective.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating how Robert Saleh attacks it. We saw him move to quarters a lot last year from his base cover three in that Seattle scheme he grew up in as a coach. But then quarters often becomes one-on-one on the outside. So you run the risk, depending on the scheme, of having Bryce Hall and Brandon Eccles and those guys on an island with DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson. So it will be fascinating. Last question on this side of the ball, John. When you look at Joe Brady, obviously he came from, you talked about his influence in New Orleans. He was at LSU. This is what I'm expecting them to do. Obviously Bridgewater, he was like 19th in air yards per throw last year, which is, a product of Teddy himself. He's not the aggressive guy that Sam is, likes to take some more shots. When I think of Joe Brady, I still think of the short to intermediate game with some boundary shots. You hear about, the mesh wheel and the Panther concepts with the mirror slants and all those kind of things. But I'm thinking 11 personnel, some of the motion packages to empty that Sean Payton uses. He used that to clear up the field for Joe Burrow. I think that's going to be crucial for Sam Darnold. Am I way off? What are you expecting generally schematically from the offense?
No, I think you're spot on with that. Joe runs a lot of 11 personnel. ran it a lot last year. That's the Sean Payton influence. Obviously, talking about emptying it out. I think a lot of what they do too is they kept 4 tight ends. Carolina did, and they've got a 5th with a fullback in Giovanni Ricci who can do some things as an H-back. There's Tommy Trimble, the rookie, who's a tight end, who's a great blocker, but they're trying to get him more involved in the receiving game. What Joe Brady does a lot that I like is he'll show 12 personnel or 21 personnel pre-snap in the huddle and create some matchup problems inside. So we saw this a lot last year with Brady. He would take a tight end and like Ian Thomas and split him wide at the boundary. You would see even a fullback in Alex Arma, maybe 21 personnel, split to the other side. You'd see McCaffrey inside, Robbie inside. And you would get the matchups one-on-one. They came right out of the gate against the Raiders and ran some of that and got some really good matchups inside against linebackers. And I think you'll see some of that utilization from Joe Brady. The X factor here is McCaffrey. Brady has not had a real full opportunity to get McCaffrey rolling here since he's been here. And I think he's excited to do that. I know the fans are excited to see McCaffrey. I know Sam Darnold is excited to see Christian McCaffrey healthy and back in action. And we haven't seen him in the preseason. That's by design to keep him fresh. But I'm curious to see, and I'm eager to see what they do with McCaffrey's deployment this year. Will they run him, at a 95% run rate? Will they continue to sort of, like North Turner did, churn in like Emmitt Smith, or will they get him a little more creatively involved on the boundary and even in the slot there? I think that's what you got to look for if you're an opponent of the Panthers this year. But yes, schematically, Joe Brady does a lot of things, but I think you're right. They do value the mesh game. They do value the intermediate stuff. It's not about just taking shots, early down shots are what I'd look for too. Something I like to do out of 21 personnel, and this goes back to Sean Payton days, is early down, quick change type of offense. If they get a turnover, go 21, maybe 22 personnel, heavy package, and do a play action deep shot. Look for one of those maybe in this game.
Yeah, McCaffrey matchup scares me a lot. The Jets are going to have 2 rookies starting a linebacker, Hamza Nasruddin and Jamie Sherwood. So it's going to be a tough day for them, no matter what coverage they play, be it zone or man. It's going to be a difficult matchup. So let's flip it now, John, quickly. I don't want to take too much of your time. Let's look at the defense now of the Carolina Panthers and what we can expect for them. Let's stick with schematics quickly. I think when you look at them on paper from an outside perspective looking in, I haven't watched a ton of the Panthers lately. It looks like a 4-3 front. They bring in JC Horn, who played a lot of man, AJ Bouye, who played some man back in his Denver days. You've got Dante Jackson. It's a nice group of secondary. In the secondary, you've obviously got Chin back there as well. What are you going to expect from them? What primary coverage are the Jets going to look for? How do you think that's going to unfold?
They led the league last year in cover 3. This is something Matt Bowen had shared with a lot of people on social media. We talked with Matt on our podcast about that. And I think you'll see less of that. I think what you're going to see more of is sort of the cover 1, especially against a team where they feel like they have a sort of an even matchup with, at least even, if not advantage in terms of being able to play man press, a little more aggressive. They run sort of a 43 under look. They've got Hassan Reddick, the new addition from the Cardinals, who can do a lot of things, usually at strong backer on top of the tight end when they're playing their base. I don't know how much base they'll play throughout the season. You know how the game has evolved. Jermaine Carter is sort of new to the middle linebacker spot. He takes the place of Tahir Whitehead, who was not very good last year. Of course, they've lost Luke Kuechly to retirement. That has been a hard void to fill, impossible void to fill, because he was a Hall of Fame linebacker. You also have Shaq Thompson at the weak side. Brian Burns, I think, is a great matchup. It's going to be fascinating to watch him against Becton out there at the left tackle. I don't know how much they'll move Burns around. I think in sub-package they'll do some of that. But Burns has some tape against Becton from his college days. They go back a little bit and had some successful reps against him. Becton, I have a lot of respect for his game, especially in the run game. He is a mammoth. And I do think the Jets offensively have a lot of question marks. Obviously, Zach Wilson is a guy that I looked at during the draft quite a bit. One scout had told me that was scouting him out, the best arm he's seen since Mahomes. And I just think he has so many dynamics he brings to the table in terms of throwing off platform, out of structure, but also within structure. He can put the ball on a dime from 30-plus yards out with ease. He's a great talent. They just got to maintain discipline in terms of rushing him, stay in their gaps, don't get too crazy. I don't know how much blitzing they'll do. I think they can get home with 4. I think it's what Phil Snow wants. But one thing I look for, you mentioned Jeremy Chin. In camp, they did a lot of this in the scrimmages, too. They would bring their safeties up and run a lot of the blindside blitzes against some of these teams, the Ravens, the Colts, in these joint practices, and even against themselves during practice. So I think keep an eye for Jeremy Chin. They've got him listed at free safety, but I think we all know he plays a little bit of everything. He's a Swiss Army knife. He can play box. He can play on the line. He can play the slot. You mentioned AJ Bouye, a very capable man corner who they like a lot as a tackler. He's out for the first 2 weeks with a suspension, so they're going to be rotating guys in and out at slot tack or slot corner. Probably see a little bit of Miles Hartfield there, who's a very athletic guy but doesn't have the skill set that Bouye does. J.C. Horn, excited to see him too in a rookie performance here in terms of his career opener coming up right down the road here at the University of South Carolina. Played some great ball in the SEC. Had some good action against Kyle Pitts. Looked good against him at times. So again, it's a young defense. They still have Dante Jackson on the other side at corner, who's sort of emerging as a veteran leader, if you can believe that. But I think they have maybe one of the top 2 or 3 youngest rosters on the entire NFL planet. So it's going to be a continual development for Phil Snow's unit. They'll run a lot of sub-package stuff with 3 down linemen, sort of the 505 tight look. You'll get a lot of the stack stuff with the 3 safeties, the 3-3-3 look. It'll be fascinating. Phil Snow throws a lot of things at people to the extent that Aaron Rodgers last year called it a college defense, and it threw him off guard a little bit. Aaron did not have his best game against Phil Snow's defense. But again, it all starts up front with Brian Burns, Derek Brown, Hassan Reddick, guys like that getting pressure with 4. I think that's the key to this game defensively.
Yeah, you mentioned a little bit about the cover 3, John, and how it's kind of going to be not as in vogue this year. And I think that's going to be league-wide. What the Shanahan offense has done to stress the middle safeties and the linebackers in a cover 3 look, those cross and post concepts, it's almost impossible. The binder puts them in. The league is definitely shifting to more a 2-high look. You're obviously going to see a lot of cover 1 still on 3rd downs, but it's going to be interesting to see how the NFL defenses catch up, because there's definitely an evolution happening as we speak. Last player I really wanted to touch on is Brian Burns. We've already referenced him a little bit. I think he's become the smoky pick for a lot of people to be the sack leader in the NFL this year, to be an all-pro caliber player. And I'm excited to see his development and see him really become a superstar this year. I think he was well on the way last year, but how good do you think this guy can be? Because he took a big step in 2020. What is the ceiling for Brian Burns this year?
I think, and I say this objectively, man, I got the Panthers hat on, of course, but say this, we pride ourselves on being a very objective and fair. And there's been some players come through the door here that had a lot of hype, and you're like, put on the tape, and it just doesn't measure up. Burns is even better than the tape at times. And here's what I mean by that. He hasn't had a chance really to peak. He's missed some time with a few injuries here, a few bugs that have nagged him. Rookie season, he had a bit of a wrist issue. He didn't really get into a rhythm there. Ron Rivera played him in some spots on special teams to help his development overall as a player. A lot of fans were frustrated by that, but that's how Ron coaches. That was a Ron decision, and I respect it. I think that now in year 3, and again, we talked with, you mentioned Matt Bowen earlier. Bowen wrote an article about this a couple weeks ago with Seth Walder on ESPN and highlighted some of the traits. And when you look at players like Burns, you look at traits. How can they bend? How do they get around those premium left tackles in the league? And against some of the better left tackles in the league, he's put together some impressive movement. He's got the toolbox you need from a pass rushing standpoint. We're good friends with Stanley McClover, Brian's big brother, and that's a great story in itself. We talk with Stanley a lot about that development, and I'm really excited to see Brian in year 3 start to speak. One thing he does a very good job with, too, is in the run game. He's an underrated run defender, I think. He put on tape as well against like Tampa last year. Did some good stuff in terms of holding his own on the edge, making good tackles against big backs like Leonard Fournette. And then in coverage, Phil Snow mentioned this today in the presser. They view Brian Burns a lot like they view Jeremy Chin, can do multiple things. The one thing that Phil Snow talks about a lot is being multiple, and he values that from all of his players. Obviously, Burns was not a Phil Snow draft pick, but they're keeping him around because he's a franchise pass rusher. He's one of the elite edge guys in the league and has the Von Miller capabilities, I think, to turn his career into, like Von has, one of the more successful runs over the next decade rushing the passer. It's going to be fun to watch.
It is going to be fun to watch. I have to say, even though I'm a Jets fan, I'm excited to watch the evolution of Brian Burns playing next to a couple of really nice players on the interior now. Obviously, they drafted Derek Brown last year out of Auburn. He's probably going to take that Quinnen Williams step that we saw last year from him. So exciting time to be a Panthers fan. John, last question. Who wins and why? The Panthers are 5.5-point favorites over here in Australia. Pretty sure the market is similar over in the States. So I'm assuming I know where you're going to go, but what's the matchup that's going to lead to that result?
Well, I'm certainly, and folks will tell you that follow me, I'm not afraid, to be honest, to pick against this team when it doesn't look good. But I think this is one of the few games this year where I do like almost every matchup for the Panthers. I like the way they match up everywhere in terms of the perimeter. I like the matchup in terms of Carolina's defensive structure against what the Jets are trying to do and their personnel as well. I am still concerned about pass protection because I know Robert Salah can scheme things up. And I know Quentin Williams. I know you have Sheldon Rankins, who's put some really impressive tape together against Carolina over the years. You got some good young rushers on that team. That would concern me. Overall, I still think Carolina has a good opportunity here to have a 31-20 type of win. I'm going to go there right now. The injury report looks clean for Carolina. Shi Smith, the rookie, is on the injury report and doesn't look like he'll play. But the return game, still kind of a question mark. The kicking game on both teams is still kind of a question mark. So if you're either team, you don't want a close game. You want to take the kickers out of it, I think. 31-20, I'd go Carolina right now. But I think Zach Wilson will, scare them for a minute. I do.
We really appreciate it, John. It's John Ellis, host of The Raw. Make sure you check him out. John, where can everyone find you on Twitter? Plug yourself. We want to see your content. Give us a breakdown.
Thank you so much, Luke. It's at One Panther Place on Twitter, the number one Panther Place. You can go to onepantherplace.com. The content is a little scarce right now, but we'll be getting it back and rolling here soon. The Roar podcast on Blue Wire. You can find that anywhere podcasts are available. iTunes, Google Podcasts, anywhere, just look it up. You'll find us. And you can also find us every Saturday on iHeartRadio. The Clemson football coverage we do, the Ingles Tailgate Show, just look that up and you can find us. If you want to hear a little college football action before the games on Saturday, that's where you can find us.
John Ellis, the best in the business for everything Carolina Panthers. Appreciate you coming on this very first episode of Flight into Enemy Territory. John Ellis, Luke Grant, we will see you after week 1 for the post-game show with Play Like a Jet. Check out everything that John's doing and check out what we're doing and Play Like a Jet. We'll see you soon.